In our examination of the text of the Gospel of Matthew, we now come to an end of a major section within that Gospel. So, as we have said before, while Matthew is recounting the life and ministry of Jesus and the importance of it for his church and for us today, Matthew is also a literary creation, i.e., he didn't just simply throw words on a page or recite facts. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 53. I'm going to be reading out of the New International Bible. When Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. This verse marks the end of the third block of teaching material in the Gospel of Matthew. A way to approach the Gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if not pushed too far, is to see them as involving two things. They involve the events of Jesus' ministry in particular, and his life more generally, and his teaching. The events are simply the important moments in the life of Jesus when he was doing something. Like any other life, they flow in a particular order. And that's important because we retell a life according to how these flow, because they have a natural order to them, we could say. So, for example, we would find it strange to write an account of Jesus that talked of his arrest, then his baptism, then his death, then his birth as an example. The order of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are definitely built around the unfolding of the life of Jesus and the events therein. Now, John's Gospel, we're not positive as to what is there. It could be that John is writing chronologically, but there is some reason to believe that he's writing thematically. Now, if you take one event that is recorded early in John's Gospel, the cleansing of the temple, did that chronologically happen at the beginning of his ministry? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke say there was a cleansing of the temple at the end of his ministry. Now there could be two cleansings of the temple, or if John wrote thematically, he had a reason to put it at the beginning of his ministry, or what we would consider the beginning of the ministry of Jesus as we read John's Gospel. Now, we've also said when we look at Matthew's Gospel in particular, that it's distinct from Mark and Luke because Matthew's Gospel has 5 blocks of teaching. These are inserted as collections of his teaching, and these are not necessarily where they belong chronologically. And there's probably more than one reason for this. This is not something we can ultimately prove, but we would need other records of Jesus to compare to get a full and complete picture of what Matthew did, and that does not exist. We have reason to believe Matthew and these blocks gathered material because of thematic concerns or because there are parables. So we have just completed the section where we've covered the parable of the treasure in the field and the pearl of great price. Thematically, they are similar. Since these parables have similar meanings, it would seem probable to me that Jesus did not speak these at the same time, but differently. And Jesus might have, of course, used the parables more than once. Now, one of the reasons that the place in Jesus' ministry is not all that important for what he taught is probably due to the fact that, like most preachers, he repeated material. One of the questions that scholars have when they study of the Gospel of Mark, which is seen to be the first gospel to be written, is how Matthew and Luke used it, because it seems that it was a source. It is widely believed that Matthew and Luke used Mark as the basis of their gospel. We can reproduce the Gospel of Mark more or less from the material that is common to these two gospels. What Matthew and Luke used was, in effect, sayings of Jesus. This seems to be what is common to Matthew and Luke. So what we could say is that Matthew used the Gospel of Mark as a basis to give his chronology. Matthew used material that is unique to him, and that Matthew thirdly used material that Luke was also aware of, which is more or less a collection of sayings of Jesus, something that might have existed orally. We're not positive. It seems early on the church had memorized a number of important sayings of Jesus. One way we can approach the life of Jesus and his teaching, I think, is to do what the early church did. I think the early church understood that the ministry of Jesus was built around a series of key events in a particular order. We need to know these events and why they are important. We also need to know what Jesus taught. Like the early church, we need to put the emphasis on what he taught, not when he taught it. Like the early church, we need to understand that his teaching has importance. Yes, but it's not where and when he taught. I think what changed over the years is that not what he taught in terms of content, but the understanding of it by the disciples. I think Jesus was very consistent over the years in saying what he said. This again reinforces the fact that the teaching of Jesus is not important for just what it said, but for what was said. Let us be familiar with both the life and the teaching of Jesus.